Good evening, everyone. I'm Alex Trianis, Dean of the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Carey Business School Distinguished Speakers Series. Through our Distinguished Speakers Series, we invite the most accomplished business professionals to discuss today's most compelling business challenges. Right now, nearly every person or business sector is grappling with the challenges to our global supply chain network. Whether we're talking about higher gas prices, empty store shelves, or unfilled jobs, we've all been affected at some level. And it's hard not to read about supply chains these days in the publications, including just this weekend in the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. Tonight, we'll explore the roots for our current supply chain issues with our expert panel and how long we can expect these conditions to continue. So let me introduce our panelists. Joining us this evening is Deanna Dunbar Daniels. Deanna spent more than a decade working as a supply and logistics executive with General Electric and then subsequently with Coca-Cola. Last year, she left Coca-Cola to form her own e-commerce business called Pinpoint Logistics, which provides the essential last mile delivery for numerous online retailers, including Amazon. Deanna is also a proud graduate of the Carey Business School. We also have with us Brant Matthews, who's the Vice President of Global Strategic Procurement at Mccormick. Brant is responsible for maximizing value for Mccormick through the creation and implementation of enterprise-wide procurement strategies and programs. Before joining McCormick, Brant spent 20 years in manufacturing, quality assurance, and procurement with Johnson & Johnson. And we have Professor Ting-Long Dai from our own Carey Business School. Ting-Long's research expertise is in the areas of operations and supply chain management, healthcare analytics, and artificial intelligence. At the onset of the pandemic, he published studies on how to build more resilient medical supply chains. He's also studied how to distribute COVID-19 vaccines efficiently and equitably. His insights have been quoted hundreds of times in media outlets, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, as well as at CNBC and on CNN and NPR and PBS. In 2021, he was named as one of the world's best 40 under 40 business school professors by Poets and Quants. So we have a wonderful panel of experts this evening. And I'll start us off with a few questions, but we're also anxious to hear your questions as well from our audience. And you can submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen at any point. And we'll try to pick up those questions, particularly towards the end of our time together, probably in about 30, 40 minutes. So let us start off, and I will be providing at least opening questions to each of our three panelists, and then we'll have more exchanges as we go through on some of the other questions. So the first question I want to actually pose to Professor Dai, which is, I think, a good scene-setting question, which is trying to understand what people mean when they say that we're having supply chain issues. And so I thought it might be helpful. We may all think that we know what supply chains mean, but if you could explain a little bit more what is involved in our modern supply chain networks. Ting-Long.
Thank you, Alex. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. So let's start with defining supply chain without giving a whole lecture. So a supply chain is basically a network of people, information, and money resources connect supply with demand. It includes suppliers, manufacturers, logistic providers, and retailers, and a lot of other people that basically put goods to the shelves for people to purchase. In a normal time, supply chains are basically invisible, and people rarely even realize it exists. You go to Amazon, click, and your order arrives next day. It's just really easy. And so supply chain, for the most part, is not visible. And supply chain professionals really appear on the cover of a Fortune magazine, unless we are talking about Tim Cook, right? In a business school, supply chain professors are quiet and polite and low-key. and they really attract media attention. So anytime the opposite happens, the world is in deeper trouble, like what we are these days. So the issue with global supply chain is that it has multiple stages, numerous players, and people have really poor visibility into it. People are generally concerned what they are immediately troubled by, outside of the mind. So anytime people talk about supply chain issues, they talk about something goes horribly wrong with their immediate concern. So for example, when consumers talk about supply chain issues, they basically referring to the fact that their preferred products are either sold out or back ordered or just too expensive. When manufacturers discuss supply chain challenges, they often mean they're running out of raw materials or they have difficulty finding truck drivers. For logistical companies, supply chain challenges often mean a labor shortage. And then look at retailers is basically made of not having the right things in the right place at the right price.
Thanks, Ting-Long. That's very helpful and very interesting to sort of look at it from that perspective of what challenges mean to the various players. So I appreciate that scene setting. Brant, yeah, you work for McCormick. We were just talking about our lovely Thanksgiving dinners that were seasoned with McCormick spices. Obviously, McCormick, a very large corporation with extensive supply chain, both sourcing materials from around the world and obviously distributing your finished products to restaurants and grocery stores, so both the consumer as well to the B2B channels. Give us your perspective on the current supply chain crisis and how McCormick is addressing it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alex. I'm really happy to be here with the panel and this really relevant and timely topic. Just to provide a quick, building on your comments, a quick introduction to McCormick. McCormick & Company, we're a global leader in flavor. As a Fortune 500 company with over $5 billion in annual sales across 160 countries and territories, we manufacture, market, and distribute spices, seasoning mixes, condiments, and other flavorful products to the entire food industry, including e-commerce channels, grocery, food manufacturers, and food services business. You and the audience will know us, in some cases, by our brands, which include McCormick, French's, Frank's Red Hot, Stubbs, Old Bay, of course, in the Baltimore area, Lowry's, Zatarain's, Cholula, and a number of international brands as well. So, every day, no matter where or what you eat or drink, you can enjoy food flavored by McCormick. And as mentioned, our global supply chain, thinking about our inputs, our spices and herbs and everything that makes the products so flavorful. We're heavily reliant on global supply of spices and herbs. We source over 14,000 different ingredients from over 85 different countries around the world, including many developing countries along the equator, and working with smallholder farmers that provide our ingredients. So clearly, under normal circumstances, a challenge from a supply chain perspective, and with the global pandemic and the impacts of it, the challenges have gone up significantly. So this has really been a perfect storm of issues, from reduced capacities, labor constraints, just finite resources for transportation and logistics, and everything happening at the same time. So under normal circumstances, perhaps there's a bottleneck, there's a shortage in one area, but I think what's different about this, the situation we have today, it's been a confluence of events all happening at the same time. Clearly, from a McCormick perspective, navigating both the demand increases are, with people at home, the consumption has gone up significantly. So, navigating the demand increases and the volatility of that demand, with supply disruptions have been a challenge. First, really big shout out to our teams around the world who, have been showing, great resilience to be able to, day in and day out, make sure that our customers' needs are supported with flavor. So some of the areas that we've needed to focus on, where we've had constraints, we've really focused on key products and key SKUs to supply to our customers to ensure supply. We took actions on wage rates to deal with some of the labor challenges that other companies and other industries have been happening as well. Really to attract and retain talent in our facilities. In some cases, we've had to increase lead times and inventory where needed. And throughout the pandemic, the relationships that we've had with our supply partners has been tested, but has been strengthened in a lot of ways as well. And as we've worked to qualify new suppliers and things like that, it's been quite a dynamic and agile situation.
Thanks, Brant. And you certainly highlighted an important theme here, is that these demand surges are typically a very good thing for companies, but they also come with challenges as well. So Deanna, I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of in particular your recent work. You've worked for large companies like GE and Coca-Cola, but you decided recently to start your own e-commerce business that's focused on that last mile delivery that we always talk about. And so that has its own idiosyncratic challenges. So tell us a little bit more about your business and some of the supply chain issues that your business is facing.
Yeah, so great introduction. Thank you so much for the panel of faculty members that invited me. This is such an honor, as I am an alum of Carey Business School. So sometimes when you think no one's watching, they're always watching, right? So my company name is Pinpoint Logistics, as you mentioned. We're a fast growing third-party logistics company based here in Atlanta, Georgia. We were founded in August of 2020, actually during the pandemic. So we perform last mile delivery for Amazon Logistics, as well as some other smaller e-commerce business firms. Safety is obviously our top priority for our drivers. Our company remains consumer focused, delivering smiles to customers, and we hire and develop the best delivery associates that we can find. We set the bar high for performance and expect nothing but excellence from each member of the team. So last year, from a profit perspective, we saw some top line growth of about $2 million with potential revenue growth of 25%. So as you mentioned, I am in the e-commerce business, and one of the current supply chain issues we're faced with is consumer demand. So as you talked about, Brent, everybody wants something fast, they want it quick, and they want it at home. So my job is to make that happen for you. And working with Amazon, who is an amazing partner, our team is delivering, anywhere from about 300 to 5,000 packages a day in the Atlanta area. So, we're faced with various challenges, labor being the first that comes top of mind, because we're just looking for new and bright talent. And as you know, in a very heavy metropolitan city, that is always a challenge. So things that we're doing to, improve our, or taking action on some of our challenges would be, we've had to increase our wages. We've had to offer different bonus structures to folks. We've also added employee benefits. We do a lot more employee engagement to ensure people are happy and engage with one another. We understand with COVID, people were away, and now that they're back in the companies, we just want to make sure that they engage with their fellow team members. Also, we've had to do various hiring. So we are constantly hiring. We're always hiring. So that definitely helps with our supply chain challenges.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. That's a great overview, and we'll dig deeper into some of this. I guess as a starting point, one of the areas that I thought it'd be useful to dig into a little bit is the use of analytical tools. That's one of the reasons why we teach supply chain management in business schools, is to bring out the importance of using these analytical tools and technologies to forecast and to manage our supply chain needs. And I'm just kind of curious, sort of to what extent those are critical in terms of, in your cases, Brant and Deanna, in terms of how you manage your business, but also how the current disruptions have worked from a modeling perspective and how you've adapted to those. Brent, you want to start us off?
Yeah, certainly. No, great question. And really, the analytical tools and the technology, has really been helpful to McCormick as we've approached the pandemic. Clearly there was no, going into it, there was no playbook, and nobody had experience of supply chain challenges that were as broad and deep as as what we're experiencing now. So the sort of the standard ways of risk management and things like that didn't apply or didn't apply enough. So early on our analytics team was really instrumental in proactively understanding where the risks were, so we could proactively stay ahead of the curve. As the COVID pandemic moved around the world and the supply chain disruptions in its wake, really trying to understand what was coming next, and where we may be impacted was really a critical action that was done. This included analytics and traceability, really back to our strategic suppliers, and in the case of our herbs and spices, back to the growing areas that we have as well, to really understand where there may be government shutdowns, where there may be logistics pinpoints, where there may be import-export challenges developing. Also analytics to really understand the demand volatility, inventory, supply, and being able to put it all together to really enable our, in the case of procurement, our buyers to have the information that they needed to drive the right actions, and to let our teams have the information and the data and the insights that they needed, really to be able to make the decisions at the best possible level, at the lowest possible level. So that was one, I think that was one key pivot that we made, is we needed to get the decision making into the right level, and analytics and the tools that we had were one mechanism to really be able to do that. And as the pandemic evolved and continued on, and the impacts to businesses were becoming evident, we also used quite a bit of sort of financial due diligence to understand the financial health of our supply partners as well, early on, to understand where there may be impacts from that standpoint. Just a couple examples there, but it was great capability to have in these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brent. Deanna, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, as everyone knows, Amazon is one of my biggest clients, and so they have a ton of analytics tools. I mean, everything from our GPS system and our routing to how we financially get paid is a part of the analytics tools on the back end. So my team, I have 3 managers, and we use analytics tools every day, from our hiring, making sure that we're onboarding the right folks, they're in the right buckets, as well as using that to manage our assets. So we have, trucks on the road. So today I have 40 trucks on the road. And so everything from tires to parts that we need replaced, managing those vendors, as that was mentioned earlier, is key. And then obviously managing cash flow to that, because now we may have to carry more inventory of various parts and tires, for example, than we normally would have, just based on some of the supply chain shortages. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing in my industry.
Yeah, thanks so much, Deanna. I appreciate those thoughts as well. And I'll round this out by asking Ting Long to provide his thoughts. I'm sure it's music to your ear to hear all the supply chain models that you research and you teach to actually being used in practice and having such an impact. Any thoughts in terms of adoption of these models, or need for new models, I guess, to deal with these kind of disruptive situations?
Thank you, Alex. I was looking at the Q&A. I realized someone asked, does GHU of supply chain management major? We don't do that per se. However, at Carey, we do have a wide range of courses, such as operations management, supply chain analytics, artificial intelligence, and also supply contracting. So jointly, these courses offer analytical skills, not in terms of managing a single factory, single retailer, and a single location, but also look at coordinating different parts of the supply chain. because eventually for supply chain to be successful, it requires visibility, and it requires collaboration. It requires not a local optimization, it requires global optimization. And so we do have a range of optimization tools, and not to mention emerging tools such as artificial intelligence. And we have hundreds, at least I know of hundreds of alumni working in different companies, including Amazon, for example. Deanna mentioned Amazon. I think this is one of the companies who have many of alumni working in this company. And so we do see we do really see the critical importance and also growing importance of analytics in managing global supply chains.
Great, thank you, Ting-Long. Well, at Thanksgiving time, I'm always reminded of planes, trains, and automobiles. But it seems that these days you read a lot more about ships than you do about either planes, trains, or automobiles. So let's talk about shipping a little bit. Everybody's been reading the Port of Los Angeles, which has been in the news lately, with ships, waiting for weeks to unload cargo. We also had our more locally, the Port of Baltimore, over one of my shoulders here, which President Biden recently visited, has not seen quite the same, negative scenario in terms of all the weights. So what is, Ting-Long, maybe you could give us a little insight. What is unique about Los Angeles to cause such a bottleneck? And conversely, I guess, how have other ports, such as the Port of Baltimore, avoided similar problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And, first of all, Alex, you're right. Everyone has seen those iconic, striking photos of those containers pulling up at the ports of LA, Long Beach at this point. Even my daughter has seen those pictures enough, and my daughter is 80-year-old, but she recently asked me, what does supply chain mean, right? Because she saw this picture on Financial Times and with supply chain next to the photo. So these ports in LA and Long Beach, they play an important role importing consumer goods into the United States, and primarily from Asian countries. And the main reason and for the congestion in such ports is kind of straightforward. It's basically that such ports are experiencing high level of demand. Basically, we are looking at a 20% increase in volume compared to last year and above pre-pandemic levels. When you have a really tight capacity, when the utilization already high, and any increase in the demand will cause a lot of congestion. Baltimore, on the other hand, is a very different story. For those who are not familiar with the port of Baltimore, this is the #1 port in the United States for automobile and trucks imports and also exports. The reason we don't see containers piling up at the port of Baltimore, ironically, is actually because of another supply chain crisis, because of a shortage of semiconductor chips. And automobile factories haven't been able to produce as much as they want to. And if you look at the average selling price of automobiles, right now is like $45,000 per vehicle. And so the reason we're seeing such a crazy prices is really because manufacturers, they don't have enough computer chips. As a result of the microchip shortage, the volume of automobiles we're seeing at the port of Baltimore hasn't reached the pre-pandemic level. And we do have enough capacity at this point. So to quickly summarize the situation, in LA, they are talking about a 20% increase in volume compared to last year, and also above pre-pandemic levels. In Baltimore, on the other hand, we are still recovering from the pandemic, and we don't see supply chain issues here because of another supply chain issue, and in terms of semiconductor chips.
Thanks, Ting-Long. That's very helpful. And Brant, maybe you can talk a little bit about your shipping strategy and how that may have changed over the last few months.
Certainly. And I think Ting-Long with that answer really sort of gave a great example about the supply chains and the interdependence and how one supply chain can influence another and things like that. So we've had have some reliance on imports from Asia, as mentioned, and clearly the demand increases, especially with ocean freight, but especially with the Asia-US West Coast routes, has impacted everybody, including McCormick. So clearly we're working to get preferential treatment up there where we can with our supply partners. We're building in increased lead times where we need to make sure that we can secure a container and get the product to our manufacturing sites as scheduled as well. And I think the uncertainty that's out there, I think, is affecting everybody also with the imbalance that we have today. Not only with containers, not only with ocean vessels, but at the ports and throughout the whole infrastructure with the unloading at the port, but then the trucks needed to take the containers away, et cetera, et cetera. Trying to project out when that's going to settle out. We anticipate it's going to take some time for that to get back to normal.
Thanks, Brant. And maybe, Deanna, I'll turn to you to talk a little bit about another part of the infrastructure, which is the trucking piece of it. And with certainly another thing we read an awful lot about is about the lack of truck drivers in the US, although I think I saw somewhere that I think it was something you wrote actually, Ting Long, that there's 3 million truck drivers in the US, which kind of astounded me, that statistic. But you obviously rely on truck drivers to support your business. So how much of this is really a labor crisis in that particular sector?
Yeah, so I think for sure there is a labor crisis. Although there are 3 million truck drivers, and you think about it, all those truck drivers are managing, every sector of the transportation business. So whether that's last mile, middle mile, long haul, there's so many different pieces of this industry and the trucking industry, quite frankly, that those drivers are touching. So it's just not enough to go around in a sense. So once that all those containers are unloaded for the port of Los Angeles or Baltimore for that matter, you've got to move that product across country or even to your local, your local city. So I know for us, we're constantly hiring, we're trying to attract good talent. I think, providing some extra incentives and then keeping the group morale up is critical to our business. Staying competitive, so providing competitive wages and or different various types of incentives is part of our strategy for labor, as well as when you think about it, we're competing against ourselves oftentimes because we're competing with the other big transportation companies. So whether that is FedEx or UPS, some of those other transportation companies we're also competing with. So oftentimes it becomes disruptive because we're competing against ourselves for the same labor pool. So we just try our best to stay focused on the folks that we have and continue to retain those folks as much as possible to take care of that shortage in the trucking industry. And might I add, we do have restrictions. So if you think about it from a truck driving perspective, there are Can you still hear my voice?
I can, yes.
Okay. Yeah, there are issues where we are, sorry, in the trucking, thank you, in the trucking industry, we do have restrictions on driving and length of time in the day. So we have to really be focused on managing our business so that we keep our folks on the road for the times that they can. And based on federal and local laws, we have, folks can only drive for a certain amount of time. So we really try to stay focused to manage that as well.
Great. No, I appreciate more detail on the understanding sort of what these challenges are. I was talking before about the Port of Baltimore and President Biden's visit. And so this is in part to discuss the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. I'm kind of curious, Ting Long, maybe you could give us some perspective on, to what extent will that investment address some of our current supply chain issues that we're facing?
Sure. First of all, everyone knows our infrastructure has been underinvested for a long time. So this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is definitely a positive step So for example, and is President Biden actually chose the Port of Baltimore to make the point that this will help address supply chain shortage, supply chain issues in short term and also in the midterm. And so the port improvements will immediately help ports from Los Angeles to Newark to Baltimore in expanding capacity and also dealing with potential surges in demand in the future. However, it's important to note that only $550 billion of this $1 trillion are actually new spending. We have this two-party system. Both parties have an incentive to inflate this number, right? But essentially, it's important to remember we have only really $500 billion that are actually new as a result of this infrastructure bill. And now, when you spread this $550 billion throughout such a vast country like the United States, which has 50 states plus DC, it's not a lot of money, and we shouldn't expect a magical boost in our supply chain capacity. And not to mention that we don't really have a track record of delivering huge projects on time and on budget. So we may not see the kind of improvements we want to see, and unless we use the money wisely.
Thanks, Ting-Long. Deanna, Brand, any other perspectives you want to share?
No, nothing to add for me.
Okay.
Well said.
Well said.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an exciting opportunity for us to at least address, as you said, sort of overdue infrastructure needs. But I think that's a fair point, that it's not so easy to do, and we'll maybe come back to that in a second. Again, but I wanted to turn to talk about innovations, and in fact, there's one of the questions that we've already received is sort of along this line in terms of autonomous robotics, other advanced technologies like wireless network, asset tracking, certainly on the driver shortage, autonomous vehicles, and so on. How do you all sort of see a lot of promise in that for addressing some of the issues that we're facing currently, or is that significantly out there in the future that we have to be awfully patient?
So I'll take that one. So my first comment is that one of my clients, Amazon, is releasing a new, they have two vehicles. They have one alternative fuel vehicle that they're releasing, and they're also testing self-driving vehicles. So my personal feeling about it as a business owner is I am slowly adapting to the reality of that, especially from a self-driving perspective, because if you think about it, we're moving, delivery trucks and box trucks. And I will say, I don't own a electric car. However, in this industry, I'm a little apprehensive to the self-driving truck, but I am adapting. I am getting there to adapt the idea. I think it's promising for sure, and I understand the intent. And a lot of my associates are really excited, especially for the hybrid vehicles and the electric vehicles that we're getting. I think the stepstone to getting to alternative fuels and then obviously to a fully automated car are great. I'm excited to see what they come out with. But I will say in this industry, it is a little, because we're high risk and our insurance is pretty high, as you can imagine, we are a little apprehensive to a self-driving truck just now. But I think the industry has a lot of promise, and I look forward to the technology that the scientists come up with.
I want to add to Deanna's by adding 2 points here. First point is that we don't need more capacity. We don't need more logistics, transportation capacity. We need more flexible capacity. By saying that, what I meant was that we do not need it. First of all, people talk about relaxing license constraints. People 18 plus can drive a truck. We don't need that. We already have a lot of truck drivers. It's just that a lot of them are not really in this business because this business is too dangerous and too dull, and the pay is not good. And so we need more flexible logistics and transportation capacity. And so technology and AI is a way to go. Like the kind of autonomous vehicle that Deanna described is actually one of those important aspects. The other aspect is to think about from big picture perspective. In addition to trucking, we also have railways, which is really important part of transporting goods across the United States. And so we really have an opportunity to automate and to transit. First of all, we need to electrify our railway system, and it hasn't been sufficiently electrified yet. And then we also need to automate as much as we can, and so that it's less reliant on labor constraints. So in terms of crisis, we can actually increase capacity and ramp up the capacity in terms of increase the demand. Second point is actually briefly alluded to that we do not need more workers. We need more jobs. We need better jobs. And like I mentioned, we may have 3 million truck drivers, like Deanna mentioned, but a lot of them are not really doing it. We're probably effectively using only 20–30% of them, just because they're not being properly treated, and their effective wage has declined by 40% over the past 20 years or so. And so we need, this is actually one area that technology and innovation can help and design better jobs so that they are working, they're feeling more, they're working safer and also more interesting jobs. Because I get the fact that this is really dull, really boring job, and also kind of dangerous, and plus not really well paid. And so hopefully we can use technology to build a more flexible capacity and also design better jobs.
Thanks, Xinglong. Appreciate those additional perspectives. Let me, it's interesting as I'm looking at the questions coming in, there's clearly sort of the sense of when will things get back to normal? And I think there's two aspects of it. One is that people want their things. Obviously, demand has surged in a number of areas, and people aren't used to waiting. And the second is inflation, right? Is that things are becoming more expensive. And so I guess there's those two prongs. One of the questions is, whether or not buying habits might change, and that could sort of have a feedback mechanism on the supply chain challenges. And the other is, I guess, pricing should influence the demand, and therefore maybe this could re-equilibrate if prices go up significantly. I'm just kind of curious, and Brant, maybe if you could give us some perspective a little bit in terms of how you've seen sort of and how you forecast into the future demand and sort of inflation that may be affecting different parts of your business.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Alex. And that, really, I mean, really critical question. As mentioned, getting the supply, but then everyone, realized that the pricing, has gone up, pretty significantly as well. So, thinking about where we've come from, and the COVID pandemic, first there was supply disruptions, and after a bit of panic buying, there was really a brief COVID-related recession. Where demand really went down significantly when the lockdowns went into effect and people stayed at home and things like that. However, once things opened up and once people got used to sort of a new normal, the demand for goods grew quickly. As mentioned, people shifted to online buying, took up new habits, and things like that. And that increased demand has been gaining momentum, sort of ever since. And as it relates to some inflation, you had some sort of weather volatility that we had last winter and over the summer, the ice storms in Texas, Hurricane Ida, the poor flooding or poor weather, including flooding in some areas, and that drives some of the agricultural products up as well. And again, this confluence of factors all coming together. And from an inflation standpoint, inflation it's a bit of the chicken or the egg. So do high prices come before supply chain challenges or vice versa? But clearly the bottlenecks that we have, logistics, as mentioned, the constrained manufacturing and labor that we have, really creating this imbalance of supply and demand. And when the demand is above the supply for an extended period of time, you get the inflation, which we're in that sort of perfect storm today. And with that inflation that we have, and this expectation that whatever the cost is today, the expectation is going to go higher, that does serve to keep demand high, and that does serve to sort of drive even more inflation because of the anticipation of inflation. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. Over time, higher prices should cure high prices as additional investments come on, as additional sort of debottlenecking is done, and new, Porter's five forces, new entrants coming online, et cetera, et cetera. So, eventually the price inflation, should temper. Now, whether that pricing drops back to sort of pre-pandemic levels, I think that's, that's unlikely. And I think that's been, a consistent message from the Fed and others as well. So I think, looking forward, there's not going to be, there's no sort of silver bullet, and there's no sort of immediate relief on the horizon. What we see is a period of, continuing inflation that will, work itself out. Historically, it always, sort of does. Although, it's gonna take some time to be able to get back to that sort of more stable price inflation environment that we're used to.
Yeah. So you're not giving us a date on that on the transient period being over, but transitory period. But
I wish I had a crystal ball. But not only is the inflation high, but the volatility of the markets. Whether the agricultural markets, we saw that on Friday with the news on COVID, the financial markets, the volatility is as challenging as the pure inflation as well.
Right. Ting Long or Deanna, anything else you want to add in terms of inflation or changing consumer habits?
Well, macroeconomics isn't my specialty, but I just want to draw from my broad observation of all kinds of supply chains is that anytime people talk about shortages, talk about the, increased prices, and you always have pure, later on, you always worry about the, wastage. Right. Back in January, for example, back in January 2021, everyone was talking about we not having enough vaccines, COVID vaccines. Now we have a lot of vaccines, and they're about to expire, and we are wasting millions of vaccines every month. And so, anytime people worry about shortages, we should also think very carefully about what will happen 2 months, 3 months from now, and because that's something we have to deal with eventually as consumers, as retailers, and manufacturers.
Right. Yep, very, very important point. Brant, you brought up the issue of climate issues, and up until this year, probably the only time that people did consistently read about supply chain problems was when there were sort of major climate issues of volcanoes erupting or tsunamis and so on and so forth. And obviously now everybody's talking about climate change being an ever-growing concern. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of how we can make our supply chains more sustainable. Ting Long, you talked before about sort of flexibility. What steps do you all see in your industries that are being taken to get ahead of what we all see as kind of a major problem that we're facing in the next few decades?
Well, first of all, nowadays, I think that every company, big and small, are facing this critical change of climate change. I think, in fact, climate change is probably going to be the most important issues that executives are facing in the coming decades. And not only because of ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance issues, not only because of ESG investors' pressures, but really because they are affecting the capacity of logistics and supply chain systems. And if you think about as the Earth gets hotter, actually we have a shrunk airline transporting capacity. We have a shrunk trucking capacity, and the changing climate actually means that given the same labor, given the same resources, same porting capacity, the effective capacity is actually lower. So that's something we really need to worry about, and because this is really about the bottom line of a business. Even from the really selfish perspective, we really have to think about how to build our supply chain and the logistics systems for the future, not just for the now.
Yeah, and I think well said. And to add to that, I think in the transportation industry specifically, what I'm seeing is, the innovation, going back to the earlier conversation about electric vehicles and alternative fuel for sustainability, as well as reduction in packing materials. So I'm noticing that companies are finding ways to make boxes smaller or packages smaller, and then we're faced to make less trips. So you, the customer, you've ordered 5 things. Instead of us coming out 5 different times in a week, we're trying to get that down to maybe 2 or 3. So that'll also save fuel and help with the sustainability, and ultimately adding to that climate and ultimate sustainability change.
Yeah, just building on the comments, clearly, making our supply chains more sustainable is critical, now more than ever. Stakeholder groups, including our customers, consumers, shareholders, and employees, are expecting companies to transform supply chains in a sustainable way. So whatever stakeholder group we think about, that expectation is there. McCormick has been a recognized leader in this space and committed to doing what's right for people, communities, and the planet that we share. Creating a sustainable future is at the heart of our purpose-led performance agenda, one of our key strategies that we have. And as a global leader in flavor, we're driving transformation across the industry with a new innovative sustainability initiative, like our first of a kind Grown for Good standard. We're thinking about some of the levers and building on and linking to some of the other comments. We're really leading the way with our commitment to the use of science-based targets across all scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3, to validate our progress towards limiting climate change to 1.5°C as part of our long-term commitment to achieve net zero by 2050. We're focused on our impact on the planet through driving clean revenue, adopting renewable energy, achieving 100% circular packaging, and improving the livelihoods of the farmers that grow our iconic ingredients. So a lot of different levers that we're looking at to achieve those goals.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and I think it's great to know the businesses are really so focused on this now. One of the other themes that we're hearing a lot is about sort of local sourcing, and in the U.S. in particular, sort of the necessity perhaps to not rely as much on foreign supply chains. But obviously this is not just a U.S. phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And Brant, you must have interesting perspectives. Obviously you're sourcing from so many different countries around the world, just based on where the farms are and so on. But what do you all see as kind of the trends that we might see towards kind of less globalization and more localization in supply chains?
Yeah, so interestingly, our ingredient supply chain is very, very global to get all the ingredients and the inputs into our manufacturing locations. But ultimately, we manufacture more than 90% of our products in the regions which they are sold. So our manufacturing footprint is very sort of consumer centric, the way we have it set up. And this is really beneficial for McCormick, as it doesn't eliminate risks. But as we have the manufacturing closer to our demand, it lets us isolate them and address them with more nuance. But clearly, the global supply of our iconic ingredients that we have, the focus is really on shortening the supply chain, so to eliminate any of the middlemen that would be in that chain, and to go as direct to source, as direct from the farming region as possible. And by making this path from farmer to consumer more direct, we ensure farmers receive fair and more consistent compensation, and work to ensure that we're helping to increase their resilience, and ultimately the resilience of our whole value chain as well. In general, I think in reaction to the ocean freight crisis and the increased lead times and the availability and the cost challenges, there has been a shift to more locally sourced supply chains in the US as well as in Europe to address those ocean freight challenges. So we have seen some of that in the short term, where there's existing capacity and capability. Clearly, if the crisis continues, we could see more of a trend towards that as well, which would drive more investment in the U.S. and in other key demand areas.
Thanks so much, Brant. Ting Long, Deanna, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll add to that. So, I'm excited about some of the locally sourced supply chain activity going on in Atlanta or the Southeastern region. I think just having things be more local, we have the ability to grow those smaller regional businesses and supply chains. Suppliers are able to source more directly to us in our region. Also, it keeps some of the commerce in the region. So from a transportation perspective, we're able to get parts and things that we need for our vehicles, as well as some of the other assets that we use to run our business locally versus trying to source, in this case, internationally. I think some of the things that we've seen with some of the part shortages, the chip shortage has definitely affected our business. And so having some of those small regional or local players helps us to get access to things quicker. So we're excited about, some of the local sourcing and vendor relationships that we're building. In terms of long-term impact, I think that it definitely will grow the region faster by us having locally sourced materials and vendor relationships. I think one disadvantage is not having access to some of the broader materials and new technology as quickly. So I think there's pros and cons, but I think ultimately it's a good thing to have those local vendors be able to help us grow our business, and then we be able to pour that money back into our local city, Atlanta, or even the Southeastern region.
That's great to hear, Deanna. I appreciate that. And Ting Long, I think you wanted to add something as well.
Yes. I just want to draw again from our Carey Business School's operations curriculum. One thing we tell people is that supply chain resilience, that's basically three important factors in supply chain resilience. So one would be utilization, how much slack you have. And two would be in terms of uncertainty, in terms of variability. We can manage them. Variability in terms of both supply and demand, like Deanna actually mentioned, in terms of raw materials, but we could also think about like from brand's perspective, consumer habits and can shift over time. So the uncertainty in both supply and demand can drive resilience of supply chain. The third factor is actually the length of our supply chain. So this is why this is a great question, because we have to think about if we keep relying on shipping everything from Asia, and this is really long supply chain. This is probably the longest supply chain can have. And we have to think about how to diverse supply base, how to shorten the supply chain. So which means not just local sourcing, but also near sourcing. Think about Mexico, Canada, even Europe, which actually means that ports such as ports of Newark and Baltimore can become even more important in the future. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is that it's important for us to be close to our supply chains, because that's important for our innovation. And we are very proud of the fact that we have a lot of innovative products designed here, made everywhere, elsewhere. But if our supply chains are too long over time, we will lose the ability to innovate. And by giving up our manufacturing, eventually we will give up everything. So that's the other perspective to understand the importance of local sourcing and also near sourcing. But it is happening very slowly, but it is happening.
And Ting Long, this kind of leads to my thought on the next question, which is, one of the classic concepts in supply chain management is just-in-time inventory, right? So that this world that we lived in, that we created, right, where everything was easy to get and it was near you, and you didn't even have to pay for the inventory if you were really good at it, right? And so all of a sudden now we've got a situation where we're seeing a lot of hoarding, right? I mean, it was the classic hoarding back in March of 2020 when everybody was buying toilet paper off of the shelves. But in every industry, we're seeing that hoarding, and it creates complexities that are hard to kind of predict and hard to model as you're trying to design your supply chain. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, all three of you, on this kind of concept of hoarding that seems to have become more commonplace.
And so I get started. I think consumers are getting more rational. I don't know, a lot of people are doing hoarding these days, but I think retailers are the ones, manufacturers, retailers, everyone is doing a little bit of hoarding, which is a rational reaction to the long supply chain that is also not just long, but also really uncertain, but also has heavily utilized. So I think it is rational reaction to our supply chain. We have to rethink our supply chain structure, and again, shorten our supply chains, make sure it's more responsive. So just in time is not a bad thing if you can do it successfully. But right now we're not doing it successfully because our supply chains are too long and we have a lot of disruptions. And if we can figure out how to make it work, it's actually a very, very good strategy. I have nothing against just in time. I just think that this is probably the only way of doing business today. And in fact, the fact that we have a lot of supply chain crisis is because we're not doing just in time, and we are doing just in case. And so then the issue is that can we actually support this kind of system, which again has a lot of with supply chain transparency. We don't really see what's going on with the supply chain. So the immediate reaction is just to make sure we order a lot. So over ordering, I think, is actually opposite of just in time. And right now, everyone people are not crazy. Actually, people are very rational. But then we have to figure out how to design a better system so that we don't end up have a crazy system, and also everyone is really rational.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Deanna, Brand, if you have comments on that. I think it's a very good perspective that it's rational when you don't have transparent supply chains and when you got a lot of uncertainties. So your thoughts in your particular industries of what you've seen.
Yeah, so I think I'm the enabler because I'm usually in my industry delivering you your good after you've probably ordered about 25 of those. So I would say, honestly, I definitely agree with the comments earlier in terms of, I do think people are rational. I think people are just reacting to what they see, and then the mistrust of the supply chain. So, my solution would be to design a process or a supply chain in a perfect world that would give people peace of mind, knowing that they can get their goods just in time or when they need them. I do believe that this hoarding experience, probably in, I would say 2 to 3 years, just based on some of the market forecasts, some of the infrastructure improvements, and just some of the things that the government as well as civilians are doing to try to improve the overall system. I do believe some of that behavior, consumer behavior, will change.
Right. And Brant, any quick comments?
Yeah, specifically for our business, there was some hoarding and sort of pantry loading, but for the most part, we saw elevated demand, and the elevated demand, stayed at a high level and continues to increase. People didn't necessarily stock up on multiple bottles of black pepper or taco mix or Frank's Red Hot or things like that to a large extent. But clearly, thinking about our supply chain strategies going forward and how we accelerate those, and a big part of it is understanding that demand. From a channel perspective, understanding the network design that's needed based on that specific channel demand and the demand volatility. And it's going to look different. There's certainly not one size fits all. Thinking about the customer needs, balanced with the external environment, and coming up with our supply chain strategies that sort of match that. And going beyond sort of redundancy, where we'd have multiple suppliers that can do the same thing, or multiple plants that do the same thing, really to agility and the ability to change quickly and pivot quickly as we've had to do.
Right. Well, thank you, Brant, and thank you, Deanna, and thank you, Ting Long, for all of your insights this evening. It was great to hear what's going on in your various industries and how you perceive the future of supply chain. So thank you all for your insights, and I appreciate the audience members. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but appreciate you submitting them. And we hope to see you again soon for our next event, which is actually going to be next week on December 7th. We'll host another panel discussion on health at home, which is a discussion on emerging health technologies, particularly focused on healthcare for aging at home. So until then, thank you again to everyone and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.